This test also has a lot of weird comma rules. There's a couple of things that keep coming up on this test number 5, and just a lot of comma rules. But this is why it's important to practice, because you know them in a lot of ways because you read and get your essays graded in school and all sorts of things. So you kind of are familiar with them. But the more you practice, the more you know which ones matter most on the SAT. So when we deal with punctuation and commas, we have to think about sentence structure. And we always, when we're thinking about sentence structure, want to think about where sentences begin and end. So we need to think about what's the main sentence and what's extra. So in this case, we could boil this sentence down to work is supported. I'm going to choice D for a reason here. That is a sentence. It's a short sentence, but it's a sentence. Work is supported. We have a subject, work. We have a verb, is. We're good. And with that, everything that I didn't say would be extra. And so normally we would use punctuation to separate that out. So this comma here after supported is required because this clause, while more complex work goes unnoticed, is getting added on. And in this case, we would need that comma to kind of just show that we're tacking this extra piece onto the main sentence. So that eliminates choice C for us. Everything else has that comma, but that gets rid of that. And you probably got rid of choice C for another reason too, even if you weren't thinking about that comma. This comma makes no sense. I get why maybe people would put it, because we know that sometimes the word and gets a comma, but it depends on the structure. That's why I don't like to think about punctuation as just like where do you pause or what words get commas, because there's exceptions. And, here is one of those cases where and is just listing two things. It's easily understood and appreciated. So there's no need for a comma. There's no list. There's no longer list. It's just a list of two things. It's not connecting two sentences, so no comma. The rest, though, is where the memorization comes in. Because we could say, and I kind of am, that this phrase, that is easily understood and appreciated, is extra. I could include it, or I could not include it, right? Work is supported. Work, that is easily understood and appreciated, is supported, right? There's kind of a interruption or a break in the sentence. And so that might lead us to pick something like choice D, where we have these dashes. That's what a dash does sometimes. It separates out an interruption. Now, that's weird, though, because in the same way, commas, two commas, also separate out interruptions. So choice A and choice D, grammatically speaking, are the same. Sometimes we would use commas, sometimes we would use dashes. That's usually the author's choice. A dash is seen usually as more of a emphasis punctuation mark, so it helps us visually separate things, and it helps us really pause there. It's a harder pause, but it's used by authors when they really want to draw attention to something. So that seems like a personal choice. How would we know which one is right? In this case, we wouldn't. There's really no way to decide between A and D because they're grammatically the same. And that really gets us to the heart of the rule here, is that even though that highlighted part is extra, it is not the kind of extra thing that gets a comma. So the answer is B. The main reason, the main thing to memorize here, and I think we've seen this in an earlier question in this test, is that the word that does not usually get commas on the SAT, okay? Or in regular writing. This is not just an SAT rule, this is a normal grammar rule, is that the word that does not get commas. I can write that. That, no comma. And the reason this is confusing is that there's a very similar word which does get a comma. And so a lot of times they seem interchangeable, but there's different reasons we might use one or the other. And generally when we're writing, that does not get a comma and which does. And so that's really why B is better here. It's not just that A and D are the same, and thus we can't choose between them. That could help us, but the real rule here is that doesn't get a comma. And the reason is it's extra, but it's kind of like a description. It basically is like a one long adjective. And so we wouldn't separate an adjective from a noun, the thing that's being described from its description. And so for that same reason, we don't really do that here. And so it's tricky, but you should memorize that. They do test that from time to time, and I think it definitely would have helped us here be much more confident in our answer. Not to throw things, not to undermine my own point here, but occasionally the word that will appear next to a comma for other reasons. So there's, never say never. And this is why, like kind of with that word and before, you have to be careful. It's not like we always associate commas with certain words. We just typically do. And the sentence could be structured in such a way that we kind of break the normal way of things. But the rules about sentence structure are still always going to be there. So if you're ever thinking about commas, think about sentence structure. Think about what's extra and what's essential, and try your best to work these kinds of rules in there. It's tricky, but with practice you can get pretty good at it.